Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci, and today we are talking about Zambia. So, Zambia, if you didn't know, is in Africa, and Africa, like South America, which we talked about on previous episodes, has this unfortunate reputation of not being a safe place to visit. But that's not, for South America or Africa, the case of all countries in those continents. No, sorry, I'm totally just thinking of if you've ever seen the, I want to say older, but they're kind of in the middle because they're not the original, but they're not the new ones, episodes of Whose Line Is It Anyway? There's one episode where Drew is introducing a game about Africa, and he's like, Africa is a really big country, and all the cast members laugh at him, and he's like, no, it's a continent, you idiot. It's a great moment. You should check it out. Sorry, completely off topic. So back to Zambia. Zambia is roughly the size of Texas or France, which is not terrible. In our last episode, we were talking about Liechtenstein, which is really small, and how thrown off my idea of sizes of countries is, being a Californian in America. My ideas of what states and countries and their sizes should be is off the charts a little. But Zambia it's a very interesting country. So most of Africa has some history of colonialism. Africa was just sort of divided up amongst the colonial powers, and they did what they wanted, and that's created a lot of the modern day problems, but that's not what we're going to get into. Zambia is one of the stranger legacies of colonialism in that it put together a large number of different tribes with different languages. So according to the official count, there were 73 different tribes in Zambia with over 20 languages, including dialects. That's a lot of different people all suddenly being considered one people. But thankfully, the Zambians, I guess, have a long history of coexistence, so that they've been spared the sort of intertribal violence and strife that you saw in places like Rwanda. Zambia, to get into, though, can be not difficult, I won't say, but maybe a bit tricky. The Zambian visa policy is evidently best summarized as confusing, in that the rules keep changing, and depending on which official you deal with when you happen to get there, may or may not even be different then. But the upside is that once customs has figured out which category you're supposed to be in, actually getting the visa is pretty easy, and most Western visitors can get a visa on arrival, but might have to pay cash. Most people, if you're not arriving from another country, tend to fly into Lusaka Airport Customs, but Lusaka Airport Customs and Immigration, unfortunately, is not well prepared to deal with tourists. They usually have 4 lanes separated by those with Zambian passport holders, but then also residents who are somehow separate from those with Zambian passport holders, tourists, and diplomats. And interestingly, the lane for tourists is sometimes unstaffed, so that tourists have to wait till all the other lanes are empty before some customs official will actually be able to deal with them. But many urban Zambians do actually speak at least passable English. So if you're in the main urban areas of Zambia, you probably will be able to get around and communicate pretty well. But as you go out into the more rural areas, communication can become harder. The English is not as widespread there. Zambia is comparatively expensive, comparatively to its neighbors, not necessarily comparatively to where you might happen to be from if you're listening to this. So, for example, a bare bones budget traveler traveling to Zambia will be paying about a minimum of $40 a day just for a bed and 3 meals, which doesn't sound too bad to me, but that's, compared to like our last episode was Liechtenstein, and we've done ones in Italy and Rome, and Italy and Canada. So, $40 a day there, actually not terrible. Like, I'm not sure I could find a hotel even just for $40, never mind with a bed and 3 meals. But compared to the neighboring countries, that might actually be somewhat expensive. However, Zambia is a pretty safe country, which was part of why I chose it, to get past that whole, everywhere in Africa is dangerous sort of thing. No, it's not. The crime levels in Zambia are actually pretty similar to most European countries, but the sort of resources to deal with crime are not the greatest. So it is a roughly poor country, and so you do want to be careful about having anything sort of flashy or leaving things in the cars or even leaving your cars in certain places because people will take it. But if you do have a crime happen to you, the police are not evidently very helpful. You may have to pay to get any sort of help from them. Like if you needed to file a form for insurance purposes, you might have to pay in order to do that. So just try and be aware, but do know that Zambia is not considered a very dangerous place. Zambians, however, do follow a strict patriarchal society, and more so even than the not helpful police. That sort of gives me pause. So in this strict patriarchal society in Zambia, men are afforded more respect than women, and older men are respected more than younger men. And I'm just always a little hesitant on places where that's the case. And again, that's not to say that all those places are terrible or that they're all, absolutely horrible to women and that all the women, that's not what we're saying at all. But that's just something that gives me personal pause. So if that's not something that bothers you, or if you're a man, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. If you are a woman going to Zambia, they do recommend that you don't wear shorts or miniskirts, because in Zambia, thighs are evidently a huge turn on. So if Zambian men see your thighs, that might create some unwanted advances or assumptions. Also, you should not point with your index finger. It is considered vulgar. And when you are meeting a Zambian, even if it's just to ask a question of how do I get here, or even what time it was, you should actually start by saying hello and how are you, and actually pay attention, because they will actually answer it not in the American way of how are you, oh fine, how are you, but actually tell you how they are. Zambians place a lot of importance on properly greeting people, and they don't really like that sort of Western idea of just getting straight to the point. This isn't small talk. This is, I guess, sort of real talk for them. So even if it's a simple question that has nothing to do with this person you've never met before, you should still be polite and say, hello, how are you? And give them the time to answer that. But Zambia, recovering, not from a bad history. Again, it didn't have the intertribal strife the way other countries like Rwanda did, but coming up economically, Zambia is sort of making a name for itself now as a must for people who want to go on safaris. It's sort of marketing itself as the quote unquote real Africa. And that evidently for people who have done other safaris outside Zambia and then go into Zambia and do a safari, that actually seems to be pretty much the case, that there are a lot of people in agreement of, oh yeah, when you get to Zambia, yeah, that's the real Africa, that before all those other safaris were just sort of touristy things and not real and made just up for the tourists. But that when you get to Zambia, this is supposedly what a real safari should be like, this is a real African safari. I've mentioned, not on this podcast, I don't believe, but on the social media podcast when we were talking about the man with the cheetah in the safari car, that safaris sort of worry me if I'm not in like a completely caged in vehicle. So despite Zambia being this must-do as a safari location, that would not actually be why I'd want to go there. I would actually want to go for a different reason, which we will talk about after the break. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about Zambia. And despite its reputation as a great safari destination, I would actually want to go for a different reason, which is to see Victoria Falls. So Victoria Falls is a waterfall, if you couldn't guess by the name, and it's one of the world's 7 natural wonders and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know I kind of really like UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The falls forms the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, and it was described by the Kololo tribe living in the area in the 1800s as Mosi Oatunya, which I apologize for the pronunciation, but which means the smoke that thunders. And it kind of really is if you've ever seen pictures of it. It's neither the highest nor the widest waterfall in the world, but it is classified as the largest since it's got a combined width of over 5,600 feet and a height of over 350 feet, resulting in the world's largest sheet of falling water. It's roughly twice the height of America's Niagara Falls, if that gives you any sort of reference. And it really does sort of look like this waterfall that just split the earth and is leading into a sort of other dimensional portal or something. It looks almost not of this world. The peak flood season for Victoria Falls is around March and April, when the full power of the falls can be experienced in all its glory. But because of that full power, you can't actually see it from on foot. You have to kind of see it from the air because there's so much spray rising from the water, the falling water, that you can't see the whole falls. There's actually a lot to do around or near Victoria Falls, which, depending on your love of extreme things, may or may not be great. So there's bridge jumping off the Victoria Falls Bridge. There's also rappelling, a gorge swing, and a zip line, which again, these falls look like they split the entire earth, even though I know that's not the case, but it's such a large waterfall going down into a canyon that it kind of feels that way. So by all means, let's zip line or bungee jump around that. That sounds like a great idea. You can also whitewater raft down the river of the falls, which has over 23 rapids. You can do a helicopter flight to see the full height of the falls. You can also do a microlight flight. And for those of you who don't know what a microlight is, it's also sometimes called an ultralight. And it's like if you've ever seen Fly Away Home, the movie with Anna Paquin about the girl training the geese to fly back to wherever for migration because they think she's their mother. Those planes that she and her dad flies, those are microlights. Those sort of not fully encased but motorized flying things. Hard to describe, but yes. There's also, interestingly, this thing called a devil's pool. And every time I kept saying that, it reminded me of Harry Potter's Devil's Snare. But it's not, well, it can be, I suppose, deadly that way. That's kind of probably how the name came. In that you can only safely go to Devil's Pool at certain times of the year, which would be between mid-August and mid-January, because at that point, the water is low enough to make it safe to do because in order to visit Devil's Falls is described as the ultimate infinity pool in that it's a way where you go into the water right before it goes over the falls, but there is a natural rock lip that keeps you from falling over the falls yourself. You do kind of have to be very brave. I've seen a video of people doing this and I'm not sure I'd be willing to do it myself. And I'm more amazed at the sort of tour guides who took them there, who are just standing on that rock lip like there's not a huge giant waterfall behind them. But you can only go during these certain times because the water has to be low enough that you get caught by that rock lip. If the water's too high, the rock lip isn't really there to catch you and you would go over and probably die. So definitely, if that's something you want to see, plan your trip accordingly, only at certain times of the year. Other things to do at the falls include fly fishing and witnessing the lunar rainbow over the spray during a full moon, which sounds, of all the things, much more what I want to do. It doesn't involve going up high in the air or going close to the edge of the falls. I can just stay safe on the ground at a safe distance, but still see a really beautiful sight. I'm, if you can't tell, not a super extreme sort of person. I like to do some things if I feel safe enough. So like I will go on most roller coasters, or I remember when I was doing college touring and went up in the towers at both Stanford and Berkeley and sort of leaned against, at Berkeley it's not too bad because the stone wall comes up to your chest, but at Stanford the whole side is just sort of a metal gate, which doesn't give you the safest sense of security that it's not rusted and won't fall out if you push on it and then you'd fall with it. But I did feel brave enough to sort of lean and look out, whereas my mother and sister who were with me at the time definitely do not like heights and were like, we're not going anywhere near the edge of that tower. So Victoria Falls, save for the seeing this really amazing sight, and it is, if you haven't, you should really look up the pictures for it. But save for that, if you're not an adrenaline junkie, or if you have any probably rational fear of heights, maybe you just want to do the fishing, the cruise, the seeing the lunar rainbow if it's around that time, and leave all the other things to other more adventurous people. I mean, there are other things you can do around Victoria Falls, but again, Zambia mostly known for the safaris more so than anything else. And even around Victoria Falls, you can actually do lion walks. Although we mentioned lion walks in our last episode, this is not the hunting lion walks that we were talking about. This is the rehabilitated lions walking with lions more so than a lion walk, I guess I should say. But these are lions not on a leash, not with a collar, that are being rehabilitated to go out into the wild that you would be walking with. So that still seems to involve some sort of level of adrenaline junkiness or bravery or just fearlessness. Something that's a little more than what I evidently have at the moment, because just the thought of that baby lion, fine. Like baby lion cubs, are they cubs? I'm not even sure what a baby lion is. Whatever they are, actually kind of adorable. I think they're really cute. So long as your parent is not around, I have no problem with that. Grown lion, no thank you. I'm fine. You can stay wherever. I wish you well as you get rehabilitated to living in the wild, and I don't want to be anywhere near you as you do it. So that makes for, interesting trips going to the real Africa safari location. But yeah, I would stay away from that. I would just go and see the majesty of the falls, the smoke that thunders with the pretty rainbow, or just take like a gazillion photos, because really I might just want to be like, how many angles can I get of what is essentially the world's largest waterfall? I need to get from this one, and I didn't get all of it, so I need to go over here, and then one from the top and one from the bottom, because you can actually go to the bottom of the falls in places. I don't know that you can go all the way, because again, this is a very large sheet of falling water. But it does seem, from some of the videos I watched, you can see where parts of the falls hit the ground, possibly, maybe, depending on sort of the, I guess it's a bit like Devil's Pool, sort of the time of the year and how strong the water is, how high the water is. When it's that strongness to the point that you can't even see the full falls because of the mist rising up, you probably don't want to be near the bottom of that to begin with. But when it's down more and you can see the whole falls, that might be a safer time. Though, of course, you'd probably want to check with a local guide to make sure that they lead you to the safe places and don't try and go on your own. So we're going to take another short break. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast. As always, we are going to end this episode with a travel tip and a travel site. And the first tip is actually a little creepy, but also something I most definitely want to make sure and do, which is to check under the bed. So at first, unless you're like a child who thinks monsters are under the bed, you're probably like, why is that so creepy? I'll tell you. So I saw this article saying all the things you should do when you immediately get into your hotel room, like check for bed bugs, which we mentioned on the last episode. But one of the things they talked about was check under the bed. And at first I thought it was just in case to make sure that like the previous occupant didn't leave something or lose something and then might come like bug you to get into the room to get it. No, that's not why. So evidently, since at least the early 80s, there have been numerous instances of bodies being found under or in beds. And yes, that is human bodies, dead human bodies. This was originally believed to just be a sort of urban legend because the author of the article that I found it had always heard about it being in Las Vegas and either around 1991 or starting in 1991. And so it's like, they can't all be Las Vegas in 1991. This can't be real. It's, maybe a story that sort of grew. But there's actually a lot of documented instances, and starting in the early 80s at least, and not in Las Vegas, but in just sort of random, regular small towns, of dead bodies being found either under the bed or in like the box spring. And usually they were not found until like guests complained about an odor, which is just sort of horrifying, because you've got to imagine if you're staying in this room and it's just like, oh, what's that smell? And you sleep and then you wake up in the morning and tell the host, hey, that room smelled terrible. It's like, but you were sleeping on a dead body. I am now sufficiently freaked out to the point that I feel this will be like the first thing I do ever in any hotel room will be like put my luggage in the bathroom so I don't get bed bugs. If there are bed bugs, but then never mind the bed bugs, I want to make sure first and foremost there's not a dead body, and then we can search for bed bugs. But bed bugs are not anywhere near the problem as being in the room with the dead body. We're going to get off this creepy topic because, yeah, completely creeped me out when I heard this. But just so you all are aware, that is something you will probably want to do from now on. So our site for today is Workaway at workaway.info. So Workaway, if you've ever heard of WWOOF, WWOOF, Workaway is a bit like that, which is a sort of work exchange for accommodation sort of site. But whereas WWOOF is mostly farming and agricultural, Workaway can be for a number of different things. So according to its site, Workaway is the world's leading community for volunteering, working, and cultural exchange, and allows you to share your cultural skills and languages with local communities, projects, and families. So it allows you to travel cheaply and stay for free while making a difference to the communities you visit. You can either put skills you already have to use or learn new skills. It has hosts in roughly 107 countries and offers different types of exchanges between NGOs and families, schools, farm stays, animal welfare, and communities. And people who use the website are called workawayers, and they're typically interested in cultural exchange and learning. And so they use the site to create an exchange of helping out for a few days, a few hours a day in exchange for food and a place to sleep. And these visits can last anywhere from a few days to a few months, depending on the host and what they state. They sort of post, hey, we're looking for someone to help us with such and such, and how many people and how long the stay can be for, and what your typical sort of requirements might be. So for some places, it might only be 4 hours a day and only on the weekdays, and then the weekends are your own. For other places, it might be a few hours every day, but varied. It really does sort of vary by the host and what they're offering. And they usually do tell you a bit about themselves. I'm of such and such an age, or it's me and my husband and our 2 kids in this family, and we're looking for people who enter thing here, who are interested in sustainable farming, who are interested in language exchange or tutoring. I just randomly picked up and looked at Korea, and there were a number, even in Seoul, but also in Busan, of just places that were looking for people to sort of come and sit at language exchange cafes for a few hours and talk to the people who came in so that they could practice their English. But it can completely vary, which is why I like Workaway, because I'm not much of a farmer. I don't think. I've never worked on a farm, certainly, and I'm not sure how good I'd be at it, but things like cultural exchange, which is why I'd want to do such a program, I think I could do more easily. And it's really, it offers a lot depending on, whatever you might happen to be looking for. And since it's roughly 170 countries, almost wherever you might be looking to go, so long as you are sort of willing to recognize, it's not a 4-star hotel. Usually they provide some meals, but not all meals. I'm pretty sure accommodation is usually guaranteed, although the accommodation may not be super great either. Even within Korea, I saw some where they were like, we're looking to refurbish an old house, which is in really bad shape. So you'd have to be sort of comfortable with not living in the greatest of conditions as we put this house back together or what have you. So it's definitely different probably from your everyday life, but it seems like a really good way, especially for those who don't have a lot of money, to sort of travel and see the world while also maybe gaining new skills and definitely sort of getting things you can put on your resume. Because I believe when you join Workaway, you are guaranteed a sort of personal reference letter for future employment or school applications or what have you, to sort of say this is what you did with your time and you weren't just off lollygagging or what have you. So all around, Workaway sounds like a really good program. It might be most of the cost would be getting to the places. They do say you travel cheaply, but not that you would travel freely. So getting to your host location might be up to you. And so you'd have to have the money for the plane ticket or what have you to get to wherever you're going. But then once you're there, it would be local travel and some amount of food, but you would most likely have a roof over your head provided by the host in exchange for what's really not a lot of time, usually just a few hours a day. So if that sounds like something that would interest you, by all means, check that out. It is workaway.info. And on that note, we're going to end for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.